In response to the full-scale invasion of Russian troops into Ukraine in February 2022, the European Union introduces economic sanctions against the aggressor country. On April the 17th, the ports of all European Union states stopped servicing Russian ships. On December the 5th, the EU refused to buy Russian oil, and on February the 5th, 2023, it stopped buying oil products. The sanctions imposed on Russian black gold will lead to a redistribution of the world market. Analysts interviewed by the New York Times are sure, and Russia will be left without the funds necessary to continue the aggression against Ukraine.
Russia must choose what to spend money on. It will be necessary to take money from social spending and the economy for military spending. This raises the question of social and political stability in Russia. I think, looking ahead, if the war against Ukraine does not stop and Russia does not withdraw its troops and there is no broad peace agreement and sanctions remain, then the future of Russia is quite negative. Falling growth, stagnation and recession. Timothy Ash, British economist, expert on Ukraine, in an interview with Voice of America.
To reduce the destructive impact of sanctions after a phased embargo, the aggressor country bypasses the restrictions. Transfusion of oil and oil products from ship to ship, mixing of black gold in the ports of third countries, disabling the identification system on carrier tankers, falsifying export documentation. In various ways, Russia disguises the origin of its own oil and exports it through the Black Sea, Baltic and Pacific ports. One of the most important routes passes through the Kerch Strait. The final destination could be the ISAB refinery in Italy, owned by the Russian oil and gas giant Lukoil. This enterprise can serve as a transshipment point for Russian crude oil in Europe. However, in addition to new logistics solutions, after losing 90% of the European energy market, Russia is looking for new buyers in the East.
As expected, China and India are picking up most of the embargoed barrels. Yet there is a surprise. The volume of cargo with unknown destinations has jumped. Russian oil, once easy to track, is now being moved through more shadowy channels. Some trades still uses the same Greek shippers, British insurers, and Dutch and Japanese banks that have long ruled the industry, from a publication by The Economist.
Turkey remains the main consumer of Russian energy resources in the western part of Asia, which in October 2022 increased its import share to 36%. This is more than, say, India bought. That is why Turkey is extremely important for Russia, but cooperation with the aggressor country can play a cruel joke on Ankara. If Turkey continues to flout sanctions against Russia, it risks losing access to US markets.
In engaging with sanctioned Russian entities, Turkish business and banks could put themselves at risk of sanctions and a potential loss of access to G7 markets and correspondent relationships. Brian Nelson, Under-Secretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, in an interview with the Association of Banks of Turkey.
For the supply of oil and oil products, Russia uses ships from third countries. The contents of their own tankers are poured, for example, into storage tankers New Legend and Olympic Vision under the flag of Liberia, which are in neutral waters of the Romanian coast. Russia can use them as loading hubs for further transshipment of oil, again to the ships of other countries. San Sebastian under the flag of Malta, Minerva Vaso under the flag of Greece, Mira under the flag of Panama, and others. Such cumbersome grey schemes allow the Kremlin to export oil and oil products despite the sanctions, but significantly complicate logistics and add problems with documentation.
We must understand that each loophole is always a complication, an increase in the cost, a deterioration in supplies, a decrease in the volume of supplies, no matter how much we would like it not to be true. To say that we will close them at 100% is, well, impossible. Russian business has emerged from the gangsters' 1990s, and it will continue to look for ways to supply the necessary equipment for itself, but again, more expensive, more difficult, and worse.
Once a supplier of more than a third of all oil in the European Union, now Russia is forced to trade resources from under the table, moreover at a huge discount. Thus, according to the Russian Ministry of Finance, the federal budget deficit in January 2023 reached a peak of 8,776 billion rubles, which is is $24 billion. For example, last January was closed with a surplus of more than $169 million. Oil and gas revenues for the month fell by 46% and the rest by 28%. The figures once again prove that the Western sanctions work and the restrictions will be increased. The EU already announced that closer to February the 24th, they would approve the 10th package of sanctions, which would contain mechanisms that block Russia's attempts to circumvent previously imposed restrictions. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Valeria Nekapelova, UATV News.